Redevelopment Committee of the Metropolitan Council for December 17th, 2018. For most of us, our last meeting of the year. First order of business is to approve our agenda this afternoon. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The agenda is adopted. Next is to approve our minutes from our December 3rd meeting. Is there a motion?
Move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any changes or corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Our minutes are approved. Thank you, Madam. Members, our business agenda begins with 2018-329 North Mississippi Regional Park Fund Joint Grant Request for trail rehabilitation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon.
It should come up, right, Lisa?
It should. We have it in front of us.
True.
Should I wait?
Yeah, it should come up.
You know, Tori, we do have the presentation in front of us on our iPad, so you could go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works for me.
Greg said he doesn't think he has this one.
Oh, okay. Well, Tori, we do have it. If
All
you're
right.
comfortable proceeding, I think.
Maybe.
There you go.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good idea.
This is a request from both Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board as well as Three Rivers Park District for individual grants to each agency to complete trail and infrastructure renovation and rehabilitation within each agency's portion of North Mississippi Regional Park. This is a joint request. It represents the agency's coordinated efforts to identify, if possible, a joint park project that would use the remaining interest earnings in that North Mississippi Regional Park Fund. The next slide is a map of the regional park system from the recently adopted 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, and it shows the general location of North Mississippi Regional Park. The park's located primarily within the city of Minneapolis, but it does extend north along the Mississippi River into the city of Brooklyn Center. It's owned and operated jointly by Minneapolis Park and Rec Board as well as Three Rivers Park District. The graphic on the left shows the master plan boundary for the regional park, and that's shown in green. The boundary actually extends from the Camden Bridge area in Minneapolis on the southern boundary, north along the river to the I-694 bridge in the city of Brooklyn Center. The park boundary includes about 110 acres. About 83 acres are within Minneapolis Park and Rec Board's jurisdiction, and about 27 acres are within the Three Rivers Park District's jurisdiction. The council approved the Regional Park Master Plan along with the park boundaries in 1987. There were subsequent boundary amendments in January of 2003 and in July of 2013. And in that latter master plan amendment, that was business item 2013-205, the council approved a boundary expansion to include Weber Park. And Weber Park there's a graphic, a photo of the park in the right-hand side of your slide. Once the council approved that master plan amendment, Minneapolis Park Board came in and requested $1 million grant to reimburse itself for the construction cost to complete the Weber Pool. So you might recall that grant coming to you in January of 2018, and that agreement was paid in full as of June of this year. So on the next slide, you can see Minneapolis Park Board's master plan boundary map. So the actual boundary of the park is in yellow. Minneapolis is requesting $478,000 to rehabilitate existing infrastructure and facilities within its portion of the regional park. Project will include pathway paving, lighting throughout the park, wading pool renovation, and improvements some upgrades to the natural swimming pool, vegetation management, and restoration. The improvements will significantly rehabilitate aged infrastructure and improve facilities and resources. Because the council grants reimburse agency for grant eligible activities and expenses, the park board demonstrated that it had committed the funding within its 2019 to 2024 capital improvement plan. The project design, engagement, and construction are scheduled to begin in 2019 with construction completed in early 2019 or 2020. In 2019 or early 2020. And then the map on the right shows the Three Rivers Park District portion of the regional park. The Park District is requesting $1,040,000 to rehabilitate existing trails within its portion of the regional park. That will include design engineering, complete reconstruction of 1.3 miles of park trails. These trails provide access to over 6,800 linear feet of shoreline along the Mississippi River, a picnic area, fishing pier, and numerous overlooks and water access sites. Its board approved the project in its 2018 to 2022 CIP, and the project design is scheduled to begin in 2020 with construction and completion anticipated for 2021. The two proposed grant projects are consistent with the Regional Parks Policy Plan. They're consistent with the council-approved master plan for North Mississippi Regional Park. Per the policy, both agencies submitted their request to the council prior to undertaking the projects. Projects are consistent with the Thrive MSP 2040's livability outcome by increasing access to additional outdoor recreation opportunities and improving the region's residents' quality of life. It's also consistent with the stewardship outcome by making strategic investments in the region's future. This slide shows a little bit of background about on the North Mississippi Regional Park Fund. That is a fund that the legislature created in 1985. It was created to acquire and develop this regional park. It's comprised of interest earnings on Metropolitan Council park bonds. The law was amended in 2015 to direct interest earnings to fund the use and betterment of all regional recreation and open space land under the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Council effective January 1st of 2018. Since 1987, the council has awarded more than 20 grants totaling over $15 million for projects within the regional park. About 90% of these grant funds were awarded to Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, given that the majority of the park development is located within its portion of the park. The proposed funding requests reflect the regional park implementing agency's efforts to use the remaining funds in a coordinated park improvement effort. So the requested grants total $1,518,000, and they essentially consume the fund balance as of December 31st, 2017. And therefore, the proposed action in this business item before you is to, one, approve a development grant for $478,000 from the North Mississippi Regional Park Fund to Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board to complete the rehabilitation of existing trails and facilities within the regional park. And the second is to approve a grant in the amount of $1,040,000 from the Regional Park Fund to Three Rivers Park District to complete the reconstruction of existing trails within the regional park. And last, to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council. And I don't see any representatives from either Minneapolis or Three Rivers Park District. They were in attendance at the Parks and Open Space Commission meeting. With that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one. So this talks about exhausting the fund, but the fund replenishes itself, doesn't it, from ongoing interest, or is this gone now?
Mr. Chair and committee member, the interest earnings continue to accrue on Metropolitan Council park bonds, and they will be used in a future yet to be determined grant program or some other
Yep.
use, but yes, they continue to accrue.
So this is just the last money that's dedicated to this park.
Absolutely, that's
Okay,
correct.
get it. Okay.
I have another question that's related, actually, which is the the fact that the park board and the and Three Rivers have these projects in their CIPs. I'm presuming that there aren't any subsequent commitments of these dollars contemplated in those CIP documents. Given that the funding source, we're not sure exactly what will happen with it, but that it won't be available in quite as earmarked a way as it has been these last many years. Um, Councilmember Elkins.
It kind of has been my hope that our successors might choose to use the money for outreach programs, because we really don't have any otherwise unencumbered sources of revenues.
I've heard a number of pretty compelling ideas about how to invest these dollars, which is good. Councilmember Munt.
Mr. Chair, along the same lines, there have been discussions at the Equity Advisory Committee about the equity grant program that's already budgeted for $300,000 for next year. It would be a sizable pool of money if we were able to add to that the grant earnings. The question that needs to be asked is, could those grants be used for things other than capital projects? Could they be used for programming, for outreach, as Councilmember Elkins talked about? So that's something to be decided in 2019. But my understanding, Tori, is that this project would not preclude that from happening next year.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Munt, yes, that's correct.
Thank you for that point. We have a staff recommendation. Would the committee like to make a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion to that motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to recognize the collaboration between Minneapolis and Three Rivers. And I also know that low wealth residents and folks of color in North Minneapolis and Brooklyn Park are looking forward to these things happening. They've been part of planning for and benefiting from the improvements.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item is 2018-330, Kingswood Special Recreation Feature Acquisition Master Plan Amendment and Boundary Adjustment. Welcome.
Mr. Chair and committee members, we're tag teaming the next two items for you.
Mhm.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you, sir, our brand new planning analyst, Colin Kelly.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. As Deb mentioned, I am Colin Kelly, formerly senior planner, but now regional parks planning analyst. Hello. Today I'm here to present the Kingswood Special Recreation Feature Acquisition Master Plan Amendment and Boundary Adjustment. And it looks like we've got a visual for you. All right, first off, some context. Kingswood Special Recreation Feature resides within the Three Rivers Park District system, located in western Hennepin County in the city of Minnetrista. Zooming in to the Three Rivers Park District system, in the map on the right, you can see that Kingswood Special Recreation Feature is located just north of Gale Woods Farm Special Recreation Feature, west of Lake Minnetonka. The boundary for the proposed Kingswood Special Recreation Feature Acquisition Master Plan Amendment includes 106.24 acres currently owned by Three Rivers, approved by the Council in a 2013 Acquisition Master Plan, and 17.97 acres currently held by a private party, but subject to a future purchase agreement with Three Rivers. That 17.97 acre parcel is highlighted in the map here and is the focus of this Master Plan Amendment. The property is located in the city of Minnetrista, as mentioned, generally north and east of County Road 15, and sits on the eastern shoreline of Little Long Lake, which you can see in the picture on the right. Speaking of the lake, the master plan amendment reaffirms the overarching intent of the Three Rivers Park District to protect and preserve Little Long Lake and its shoreland for future generations. Little Long Lake is one of the most pristine lakes in the Twin Cities. The excellent water quality allows for a two-tier fishery of panfish and northern pike populations, as well as a trout fishery, which is an unusual occurrence this far south in Minnesota. This acquisition would result in the removal of the only residential structure and the only non-public development on the main body of the lake. In addition to the lakeshore frontage, the 17.97 acre property includes a home and natural areas. Land north of the property is owned by Three Rivers and a private landowner. The long-term natural resource plan for the property is to restore the property to vegetation characteristic of the Big Woods ecological subsection, where oak woodland and maple basswood forest are the most common vegetation types. This would extend protection of this relatively rare assemblage of tree and plant species, which is present in other portions of Kingswood. Further, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources considers this to be a regionally significant natural resource area and ranks it a 3, which is the highest ranking. Areas ranked as a 3 are typically larger in size and surrounded by complementary land cover and uses, and have a greater species diversity. Generally, the development concept of Kingswood's special recreation feature may be divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 focuses on stewardship and interim use in the near term. Currently, there is a small gravel parking lot on Kingswood Road which provides access to 1.35 miles of hiking trails and a picnic shelter north of the road. Phase 2 focuses on the development of the Baker Carver Regional Trail over a longer term. The planned regional trail will ultimately connect the special recreation feature to the Loose Line State Trail and Baker Park Reserve to the north, and to Gale Woods Farm, the Dakota Rail Regional Trail, and Carver Park Reserve to the south. The council approved the Regional Trail Master Plan in May 2015. Of course, prior to any significant development of the property, Three Rivers Park District will prepare a development master plan to more thoroughly evaluate the special recreation features plans for development and operations. More robust community and public engagement activities would also occur at this time. Met Council staff find that the proposed acquisition master plan amendment is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, particularly Planning Strategy 1, Master Planning, and other council policies. So the proposed action before you is to, number 1, approve Three Rivers Park District's Kingswood Special Recreation Feature Acquisition Master Plan Amendment. Number 2, approve the boundary adjustment adding 17.97 acres of high-quality natural resource land on Little Long Lake in the city of Minnetrista. And 3, inform Three Rivers Park District that it must submit the Kingswood Special Recreation Feature Development Master Plan Amendment for Metropolitan Council approval prior to requesting funding for development. And with that, stand for any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for the report. Are there questions, council members? Councilmember Mott.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. Kingswood is in my district, and I want to make sure folks know that the city of Minnetrista is very supportive of both the boundary change and the acquisition.
Excellent. They seem like very strong moves to make. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. Discussion of the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Our next item is closely related. It's the Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund grant for the same project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Colin showed you, we are interested in the property that it's in the orange circle down here, sort of irregularly shaped. You might be able to see at about 12:30 on that circle, there's a little white spot. We have one little driveway easement on this property that must be dealt with before Three Rivers will close on this property. but I believe it's true that it's owned by a relative of the current seller, so we won't have a problem vacating that easement. We have some more pictures of this property. It is truly beautiful. The lake is so pristine that people fish it for bass and panfish and even trout using inner tubes. So they float in the tubes because it is not a motorized lake. These are all pictures from the house. These were from the appraisal. The house itself is very large. It's about 4,500 square feet. It's a gorgeous home. Unfortunately, because of the topography of this property and the fact that the house is on one side, way over by the lake, where the driveway winds through the property, Three Rivers looked at the potential for reusing this structure elsewhere for housing, but because it's a long ranch style house, they don't think it can be moved, and they don't think that bringing in heavy equipment to access that house is worthwhile, and they think it would damage the natural resources. So they are proposing to demolish it, and that will be done with some of the stewardship costs that they are requesting for the grant. This property has 660 lineal feet of shoreline, and in this particular case, Three Rivers is also requesting future reimbursement consideration for their match to the grant. The estimated costs here are $2.1 million for the property. That is 100% of the appraisal costs. Due diligence was 10.8, holding and closing costs almost 27.2. The stewardship here, $62,000. That's almost certainly just the demolition. Brings the total cost to $2.2 million, as Colin mentioned. The grant structure here would be $990,000 from Park and Trails Legacy Fund, and council bonds would add another $660,000. Total grant would not exceed $1,650,000. And we tell you the grant doesn't exceed that because if they underspend in any way, they relinquish those funds back into our Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. Then Three Rivers would provide $550,000 in local match. Rationale is that this acquisition meets the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan. It meets the state fiscal year 2019 requirements for the Park and Trails Legacy Fund. And it also is consistent with the Kingswood Special Recreation Feature Acquisition Master Plan after it is approved by the full council. This acquisition is contingent upon that approval. I might also mention that in this case, Three Rivers has taken the additional step of delaying the closing until next August. That's because we are almost certainly going to run out of Park Acquisition Opportunity funds for the end of the year. By delaying this purchase, they are affording other agencies more flexibility in using the funding that we have right now. We will be getting the next appropriation of legacy funding starting on July 1st. And if necessary, Three Rivers will use that funding to fund this grant. Therefore, staff recommends, and the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission agreed, that the Metropolitan Council should approve a grant of up to $1,650,000 to Three Rivers Park District to acquire the 17.97 acre Baker parcel in the city of Minnetrista at 1705 Retreat Circle for the Kingswood Special Recreation Feature. Authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council. That the council should consider reimbursing Three Rivers Park District for up to $550,000 from its share of a future regional parks bonding program, and to inform Three Rivers Park District that the council does not, under any circumstances, represent or guarantee that future reimbursement will be granted, and expenditure of local funds never entitles a park agency to reimbursement. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, council members? Councilmember Kramer.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
A second.
And a motion and seconded. Discussion of the motion. Councilmember Munn.
Mr. Chair, I'm just really excited that we have such a rare opportunity with a willing seller for such an environmentally valuable piece of land.
Well said. Other discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is 2018-332 Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Grant for Great Cloud Island Regional Park, Washington County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great Cloud Island is on the other side of the metro. It is in Washington County, and you can see it there in the circle with the arrow next to the Mississippi River. I'm going to show you 3 maps of this property because the contiguity of the property is important. As you see it here, it is in a backwater that is known, backwater of the Mississippi River that is known as Moore's Lake. The actual parcel is outlined in yellow, and you'll notice that some of that is actually in the river. It is also composed of the blue parcels on what would be the northeast here. One of them is a smaller island. One of them is a peninsula off Lower Great Cloud Island. Then the red parcel is on the Lower Great Cloud Island, and that is where the location of a home with a few outbuildings is also located. And here is just an aerial of the same so you can get a better idea. All of these portions of this parcel will contribute 2,400 lineal feet of footage along Moore's Lake. There is a flowage easement across this property because obviously it floods. The flowage easement is to the benefit of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They control the easement so that they can raise and lower the level of the Mississippi above the Hastings Dam. The easement was put in place in 1931. Washington County doesn't believe it will have any impact on the operation of the regional park, except of course that it'll flood once in a while. Most of the outbuildings on this property were built back in the 60s and 70s. There is a very cute little maple sugar building that they still use. There is a cabin that was built. I think the cabin is the one on the upper picture there. The cabin is in serious disrepair because it's flooded several times. This one is a simple fee title acquisition with that flowage easement. It does have a life estate on it, and I don't believe I've brought one of those to you before. In this case, the life estate is in favor of the 85-year-old current owners, and it remains in effect until the current owners decide to leave. It's not until their death, but until they decide to leave, so if they go to assisted living. In that meantime, they will not be paying any rent to Washington County, which would present us with problems regarding non-recreational revenue, which we would have to deal with. The earning of such revenue is prohibited by our regional parks policy plan. The current owners will be responsible for all upkeep. They will pay all the taxes, they will pay all the utilities, and Washington County is entitled to an annual inspection to make sure that they're taking care of the property properly. The appraisal on this one was $470,000. The county has negotiated an amount that's 107.45% of the appraisal. That is within our practice of capping legacy funded acquisitions at 110% of the appraisal cost. The county believes that this additional price is worthwhile simply because of the location of this property. Purchase price here is $505,000. Due diligence was $8,200. Holding and closing $11,525. You might have noticed in the application that is attached to this, the grant application that is attached to this item, that at one point there had been stewardship costs requested. However, after staff talked to them, they removed those costs because the stewardship portion won't go into effect until after the current sellers leave, which would be beyond the 1-year time period of the grant. So the total costs are just under $525,000. Of that, we propose to fund this with Park and Trails legacy funds of $236,126.34, council bonds of just over $157,000, with a grant not to exceed $393,543.90. And we actually have the cents in here because our Web Grants online grant management application splits this by a percentage, and we put the cents there so that we don't have to go back in and muck about with the grant application. This is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan. It's consistent with Park and Trails legacy requirements and with the Great Cloud Island Regional Park Master Plan. Therefore, staff and MPOSC recommend that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $393,543.90 to Washington County to acquire the 20.15 acre Hale parcel located at 11701 Great Cloud Island in the city of Cottage Grove or Great Cloud Island Regional Park, and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council. With that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Dorfman.
Mr. Chair, thanks. So are there just these two structures on the property, or is this the cabin that you said had flooded many times? Is that the residence for the older couple?
Mr. Chair and council member, no, there is actually
There
a
are there.
home there
That's
as
what I
well.
figured. Okay.
There is also, I believe, a garage on the property.
Other questions?
So you think this is a fair amount to give them, the seniors who own this property?
Mr. Chair, council members, I do. In this case, if we lose this property now and they sell it to another private buyer, we will probably lose it for 30 years.
Okay. I would entertain a motion, members.
Move the approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion of the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is 2018-352, Adoption of the Livable Communities Act Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Goals for 2011-2020.
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome,
Chair.
Paul.
I'm Paul Burns, manager of the Livable Communities Programs. This is a straightforward request. The city of Shakopee has passed a resolution electing to participate in the Livable Communities Act programs. We've held the required public hearing and held the record open. There were no comments during that comment period. So the proposed action is for the council to approve the attached resolution that's attached to your business item, adopting the Livable Communities Act Local Housing Incentives Account Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Goals adopted by the city of Shakopee to participate in the Livable Communities Act for the calendar years 2019 through 2020.
Thank you. As succinct as our hearing that we held on the same topic.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see at the end of the resolution that they get a affordable housing goal of 598 units and a life cycle housing goal of 2,100 units. Is that what it would have been for the whole 10-year period, and now it's for a 1-year period, or was it prorated?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, it's more prorated. Most of the other, well, all of the other communities had a range of goals periods. This is more what they expect to attempt to work towards within the next 2 years.
Okay.
Okay.
I move approval.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion to the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Last item on our business agenda is 2018-353 Livable Communities Act Tax Base Revitalization Account. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm working off a previous version. We've got two more business items. 353 is Livable Communities Act Tax-Based Revitalization Account Grant Recommendations. Welcome, Marcus. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this item on your agenda today. So the purpose of the tax-based revitalization account is to clean up contaminated properties and develop those that will increase the tax base and add jobs or affordable housing units. The account is also intended to provide the highest public benefits for the costs incurred and consider funding from other development partners. We offered 3 development categories this funding cycle: investigation, cleanup, and what we call the SEED program. That one allows for investigation and cleanup in areas of concentrated poverty. We received 17 applications requesting just about $6.5 million from various spots of the metro here. The locations are shown on the map in blue. That would be Bloomington, Hastings, Minneapolis, Robbinsdale, Roseville, and St. Paul. Most of those were cleanup applications. We received 1 investigation application and no SEED applications. Talk about funding for a moment. With additional funding remaining from the TBRA, TOD, and SEED grant categories, those are shown in kind of gray and a very small amount in green for the SEED. There is just about $4.4 million available to award. So overall, the account is oversubscribed. There are some funding limits. The limit is 50% for individual cities, and up to 75% of the funding could go to the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So we'll take a look now at the funding recommendation and those relative amounts. The cumulative total funding recommended for the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul is 75% of the total recommended award. Thus, this statutory limit has been met. Similarly, the total funding recommended for the city of Minneapolis adds up to 49% of the available funding. Thus, the single city statutory limit has also been met. Thinking of the scoring criteria, the funding limits, and the following table here shows the results of the project evaluations. The projects are listed in descending order by rank, includes the request amount, other public funding amounts, and the TBRA amount recommended. It's the same as Table 2 in the review record of the business item. So I'll go over those now. The following 11 cleanup projects are recommended for TBRA funding. RBC Gateway, $781,200. Gateway Northeast, $60,500. Fairview Business Center, $441,600. Northwest University in Dale, $233,700. Senior Living and Daycare, $192,900. Bessemer at Seward Commons, $302,800. Next is the Edison Apartments, $633,000. Calhoun Towers Building C, $426,800. Raymond Station, $483,900. Rand Tower, $583,200. And Robbinsdale Apartments, $250,000. I'll add that the amount for the Rand Tower is equal to the balance remaining after we funded the Robbinsdale project, and that was funded to meet our spending goal for suburban communities. Staff is also recommending 1 investigation grant. That is for the PIK redevelopment, $50,000. Which leaves 5 projects that are not being recommended for funding. 3 of the projects scored high enough in the evaluation to be recommended, but could not due to the statutory funding limits. And 2 projects did not score high enough to meet the minimum score to be recommended. required to be recommended for funding. Shown here are the cumulative expected benefits to the region. If the staff recommendation is approved, gains are expected in the annual tax base, jobs, housing units, including affordable units, as well as the commercial industrial space. And in closing, I'll go to the staff recommendation. The recommendation is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the transfer of $1,861,700 from the tax-based revitalization account transit-oriented development and $77,900 from the tax-based revitalization account seeding equitable environmental development grant categories to the tax-based revitalization account grant category. Award 12 tax-based revitalization account grants totaling $4,439,600 to assist redevelopment projects in the cities of Bloomington, Minneapolis, Roseville, Robbinsdale, and St. Paul, and authorize its Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. Questions from committee members about the staff recommendation? Councilmember Kramer.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion of the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion is carried.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And last not least is item 2018-356. That's the City of Eden Prairie Smith Village Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Another District 3 item on our agenda this afternoon. Lots of action.
Thank you, Chair Commerce. District 3 is where it's at.
That's right.
Thank you, members of the committee. You have before you a comprehensive plan amendment for the City of Eden Prairie for the area known as Smith Village. This amendment regards approximately 7 acres of property from church, cemetery, and industrial to medium-high density residential in order to facilitate development of the Smith Village mixed-income housing campus comprised of 3 product types for a total of 164 units and a density of 23 units per acre. In a moment, I'll show you the project location. Animation. All right. There's the project location. As shown in Figure 1 of your staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 gives Eden Prairie a community designation of suburban, and the amended area in question is shown in red. It's just north of 212 and just north of the regional trail. And there we have the Smith Village Amendment area in relationship to the regional systems in which you can see the Minnesota River Lost Regional Trail. This is also in Figure 2 of your staff report. And the trail is adjacent to the site. In Figure 3, and in front of you, you have the existing and proposed land use designations. On the left, the existing land use is church, cemetery. 1 parcel is industrial. Church is located on the parcel currently guided church cemetery, and that building will be demolished. So our findings today are that the proposed amendment conforms to the regional system plans. It's consistent with council policies and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So in closing, just let you read the proposed action here that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached review record and allow the City of Eden Prairie to place the Smith Village Comprehensive Plan Amendment into effect. Finding the amendment does not change the city's forecast, and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for regional parks and housing during the staff report that you have in front of you, but I can detail them if you like. Otherwise, that's, in sum, the presentation.
Thank you very much for the report. Are there questions or motions? Councilmember Munn.
Chair Commerce, folks, I encourage you to approve the comp plan amendment. The Smith Village development is a huge victory for affordable housing advocates in Eden Prairie. In fact, earlier in December, we provided a Livable Communities grant of about $900,000. The development will bulldoze a church and replace it with affordable community. The particular Smith Village project is 90% affordable, and includes 14 3-plus bedroom units, which is what immigrant families in Eden Prairie have been begging for, so that their families aren't divided into 2 homes instead of 1. This is a really good comp plan amendment. I move approval.
Thank you. It's been moved. It's been seconded. Is there discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That concludes our business agenda, members. Our final item is our information item and discussion about the 2019 Annual Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan. Welcome back, Paul Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you can tell, we don't have any time to rest. We're moving right on to the next year's fund distribution plan. And we want to get this committee's input on some issues or some questions we are contemplating for this next year's fund distribution plan. So we thought we'd get started, and you can give us direction on what we should or shouldn't be working on. So we want to discuss some potential changes in the next year's fund distribution plan. Hopefully it'll come up. Or maybe not. So hopefully, do you have the PowerPoint on your?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm pressing all kinds of buttons here. Nothing's happening. So thought we'd start out with a little recap from last year. And a number of you served on a working group with Metro Cities to talk about changes for last year's fund distribution plan. And one of the big things that came out of that dialogue was the need for more outreach. So we've been trying to do that. Carol Critchley, our council's video person, has done a number of videos to help highlight some of the more successful projects. That's up on our website. She did, I thought, a fabulous job. So did some of you members who were interviewed during for some of those videos. We also increased the number of static profiles that we have on our website of projects that have been successful and why. So we're continuing that effort. And now just last Tuesday, we had a joint session with Metro Cities. They sponsored, we had it at their offices. We had 29 people from, I was counting roughly about 24 communities that showed up, and we walked through the calendars, the usual dollar amounts, the highlights of each of the funding accounts, and it appeared to be a really successful effort, and we hope to continue doing that sort of thing in the future. There are a number of issues, though, that have come up over time, and some of them we've talked about before that we want to revisit. One of them is, should we keep the tax-based revitalization transit-oriented development category of grants? Another one is we've struggled a little bit with smaller jobs projects that can't compete with the bigger jobs projects, especially in the tax-based revitalization account. But we're also thinking about that in terms of the Livable Communities Demonstration Account categories, both the TOD and the regular program. And then we're pretty excited about an idea we have for the local housing incentives account to try to help spread that money more effectively. And land acquisition, refining those criteria a little bit for LCDA and LCDA TOD, and then how to score repeat applications for LCDA and LCDA TOD that come back again, and sometimes they're the bigger projects that sort of dominate the competition for a couple of years in a row. So we're trying to think about ways to help make it, a little more fair to the newer applicants that are coming on board. And then just a few other refinements to the scoring process. We'll start out with the tax-based revitalization account, transit-oriented development grants. You might remember last year, the city of Minneapolis expressed a desire to retain that category of funding. But then we didn't get any applications in that category. We haven't had any development applications, cleanup applications in that category for a couple of years now. And before we get too far into that, it might be somewhat of a moot point because we've been working with our community development, our joint community development MTS finance people with the finance division to confirm what our balances are in the various accounts. And it's looking like in the tax-based revitalization account, we'd have enough funding to continue the seeding equitable environmental development and grants that are targeted to areas of concentrated poverty. But we'd only have a little bit less than, if the preliminary numbers are correct, we'd only have a little bit more, under $1 million left to fund these tax-based revitalization TOD grants. So I'm thinking that unless we find more money there, we might want to hold that remaining balance out to continue the seed program into 2020. But if you members of the committee feel more strongly about retaining the TBRA TOD, we'd have slightly under $1 million available for that. I've reached out to the city of Minneapolis about what their position might be. They don't know about the balance, but they were interested in retaining that category, but they'd also like to, we currently have it only offered when there's also a Livable Communities Demonstration Account TOD grant too, because if we were just getting the TBRA TOD, they really weren't transit oriented. They were just other cleanup grants that really should compete in the regular TBRA and can compete in the regular TBRA category. So,
yeah, let's have some discussion. Councilmember Dorfman.
And thank you for reaching out to the city of Minneapolis on this. They, of course, wanted to decouple when we talked about this previously. And I think we still don't fully understand why there have been so few applicants. There's some conjecture about why there isn't. But one of the things that we could do before this comes back and we make these changes is, I believe it was Minneapolis, Hopkins, Brooklyn Center, and Brooklyn Park that had all communicated some about this issue. And it might be worthwhile for staff to just reach out and have a meeting with them to talk about this and what they want to see and what their solutions might be.
Mr. Chair, we can do that.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I've been raising my hand every time we have no applicants and saying, why don't we put this all in one and be more efficient? Really, the only reason to have two separate programs is to try to avoid the statutory limits on how much can go to one city. That's the only argument. Anything else, all goes in the favor of putting them together for efficiency, ease of application, and all of the other logistical sort of things that go with that. I remain very committed to the idea that having one program makes much more sense than having multiple programs, because any project that is TOD is going to score well in the regular program. It'll probably outscore most of the other projects even in the regular program.
Which is in some ways, you know, one of the reasons to maintain some separation if you are intending to have a designated program for TOD, not the entire program just for that purpose. You know, it's having two tools available could be advantageous to meet a range of goals, is my view. Councilmember Dorfman.
And Mr. Chair, I would also just add, obviously now with Southwest LRT moving forward, and then also certainly a sense of optimism that Botno will too, that there's certainly going to be more opportunities for TOD projects along both these corridors.
Yeah. Other comments on this particular point?
Looks like we have the PowerPoint up.
There we go.
You just saw Mr. Martin's presentation on the tax-based revitalization account, regular awards for the fall round. One of the projects that didn't compete well was a small project in the city of Hastings. We've also, over the years, run into a few projects. There was a small grocery in St. Paul that was going to be redeveloped on the site of a former gas station. The cookie cart, I think most of you have heard of that, came in. And these smaller projects, there have been a few others in the outer reaches of the region that small communities have had small manufacturing or other gas station redevelopments that just haven't been able to compete because they haven't been able to produce a significant number of jobs compared to some of the other ones in the core cities. So uh, Mr. Martin is confident that he can come up with a way to help um, raise the competitive scoring for these smaller projects so that they don't have to compete with the bigger projects that obviously are going to produce a higher amount of property tax increase and jobs. And so uh, we're, uh, we're hopeful that we can come up with a way to fairly give a boost to those projects that might have a bigger impact, comparable impact in their neighborhood to the bigger projects like Northern Stacks and Fridley, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question as far as how many? I mean, the smaller opportunities that we're talking about, is this one a quarter, or I should say one or two each round? Are we talking five? I mean, what problem are we trying to solve?
Mr. Chair, Council Members Chavez, it's not a lot. It's relatively uncommon, but maybe one a year or one every 2 years, we'll get a project like this that could have an impact on its neighborhood, but just can't compete with the bigger dogs.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
It feels to me like this is consistent with the market momentum where there's a lot of interest in infill sites and optimizing relatively small areas, and those projects can have really significant impact on those neighborhoods or on those cities. But I can see why they would be challenged in competing with some of the larger, sort of more key projects that we also see.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm sensing that we should continue to try to come up with something.
That's my sense. Councilmember Wolf, you have a comment?
Mr. Chair, I would agree. I mean, the program is supposed to be for the entire 7-county metro area, not just the most property valued portions of the region. So the more that we can make it belong to everybody, the more that there's long-term support for the program.
I'll take that as a yes, Mr. Chair.
I think so. Yeah, let's continue
The next one
through that.
is one we're pretty excited about. Again, we don't have a huge demand for this, but there's been over the years an occasional project that doesn't go through Minnesota Housing. If you remember, our local housing incentives account grants are done in conjunction with Minnesota Housing's super request for proposals. So we only see the applications that apply for deferred funding through Minnesota Housing. There are other what's called sub-allocators of the 9% low-income housing tax credits in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Dakota County CDA, Washington County CDA, and we don't see those. So Mr. Kelly's been working with Minnesota Housing and these other sub-allocators to see if somehow we can tap into their application process and identify whether there's some projects that are worthy that could use our help. And we have, relative to all the other affordable housing funding, we're relatively modest amount of money, but sometimes these projects in, say, Washington or Dakota County, or even some of the Minneapolis and St. Paul projects, we might be able to have an impact. So with your blessing, we'd like to try to work out a process for identifying those. Council still has the option of just sticking with all the Minnesota Housing ones that we're eligible to help fund, but this would just open up the pool a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a really strong improvement to me. Councilman Wolf,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments from the last one apply to this one as well.
carried forward. Other thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These made sense to us. It's just, we didn't want to move ahead without making sure that we're on board with your, the committee's intent. And here's another area that we've struggled with a little bit is land acquisition costs. Under the LCDA and the LCDA TOD, typically we fund infrastructure, but we also fund land acquisition. And a couple of years ago, we refined it a little bit to say we'd look back 12 months if it was an acquisition for affordable housing or the retention or creation of jobs in low income and also serving underserved populations, just to help. Sometimes they have to get site control and get temporary financing until they can put their project together. That's worked out relatively well, and we're thinking that maybe it'd be good to make that a condition of all land acquisition so that the more, how should I put it, flush office building or market rate housing, have more resources to fund acquisition, and maybe our funds would be better targeted to this kind of focus.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a good thing to look at. If you provide council funding for market rate housing, it's now subsidized market rate housing, which, given that we have a shortage of affordable housing, subsidizing luxury housing doesn't make a lot of sense with the limited resources that we have available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well taken. Other comments? Generally, folks in support of exploring this? Okay, I think so too.
Mr. Chair, nothing's ever simple either. We'll have to prorate it for mixed income projects, but I think we can work that out. Another thing that's come up is and I mentioned this earlier, is some of the bigger projects sometimes come back for a second or sometimes even a third round of funding.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they're big projects, and for them to get the same score that they got the last year, unless they've made changes. Now, sometimes we talk to them and say, okay, what more are you offering this round? And sometimes they do. But other times they're just the same project that needs more money. And sometimes it's valid because they're bigger projects, more ambitious. But when they have the bigger range of outcomes, it's harder than for smaller, newer projects, first coming in for funding to compete. So the thought is, and the TBRA program already does have a reduced score for second request, and we're thinking that this is maybe an appropriate thing for LCDA and LCDA TOD as well.
Mm-hmm. How does that work with TBRA currently? Is there just a flat discounting?
There's a percentage, Mr. Chair, there's a percentage reduction. Mr. Martin, if you want more detail, Mr. Martin could explain it better than I could.
Sure. I guess I'm curious.
Mr. Chair, currently for those situations, what is done is it's a ratio of the benefit to the grant request. So, for example, if there was a project that had 100 affordable units and they had a certain dollar request, as they add to that request, then that the bottom portion of that ratio, then that is going to get them less points in the evaluation. So it's going to reach a point at some point where it will be too expensive to get a recommendation,
Mm-hmm.
positive recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilmember Wolf and then Councilmember Dorfman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would seem to make sense because they've promised us a certain outcome for a certain amount of money. if they want more money, they have to give us something new that we weren't going to get before, and it should be only graded on the new stuff, not on what they already got money for, because they already got paid for the first chunk of what they were gonna do.
Councilmember Dorfman.
How often do we see repeat applications for the same project?
Well,
Essentially the same project?
Mr. Chair, council members, I just kind of wrote down a few that came to mind. Place in St. Louis Park
Yeah.
has been back 2 or 3 times. Again, very ambitious, very big project. Northwest University in Dale just came back this year again for additional funding. They came in last year for land acquisition, and now they came back for more development funds. Great River Landing in Minneapolis is a marvelous project, but they needed additional funding. Going back, well, actually, the Great River Landing in Hastings came back for additional funding. And then going further back, the Mosaic project in Uptown. Those are a few that just came to mind.
So, Mr. Chair, but some of these projects, they know they're going to come back. They seem to view this as we'll have to come in for multiple rounds to get what we need. No?
Mr. Chair, council members, sometimes they do, but sometimes they're counting on another funding source. This is particularly true in affordable housing projects. They're counting on another funding source that doesn't come through. So it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's they do know. Sometimes they're just early in the process, like land acquisition, and they don't fully know what all their costs are going to be. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I get they're trying to cobble together. And for these projects that are coming back that we funded once and they're coming back asking for more, we typically try to meet that request, right?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, yes, we do relative to the rankings of the other projects.
Sure.
Sometimes they get partial, Mr. Chair,
Not
Councilmember
everything
Dorfman. Another reason is sometimes they get partial funding because they hit the funding cutoff and they didn't get as much as they had originally requested.
I'm drawn to the idea of some modest discounting because I feel like it's just a very clear way to just give a kind of a modest nudge to, we really want your best and kind of full ask up front. We recognize there's a lot of variables, some of which you just described, that remain uncertain for the first, number of years of a project like this. But I'm also sensitive to the point that Councilmember Wolf makes about, there's a contract that's in place, and we want that to be fully kind of, not that those are not abided by, but that needs to be kind of the key thing that frames the conversation between us as an investor in the project and the developer.
And Mr. Chair, another dynamic here is that we may have to be a little bit more extensive in our criteria for this because there are more outcomes often in the LCDA and LCDA TOD. The tax-based revitalization is more focused on cleanup costs, but they do also have oftentimes affordable housing and/or jobs or tax-based. But sometimes the demonstration account has other features of demonstration value that we don't want to discourage by limiting the amount of funding. So we need to be thoughtful in how we do this. Marcus reminded me another scenario is phasing, but generally we try to compartmentalize the phasing and we only count what's being produced in each phase.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no issue with somebody phasing a large project and coming in for different grants for each phase, but you come in with a big project and you say, this is what I'm going to do, and then next year, well, that's not really what I was going to do. I need more money. If I'm going to do what I told you the first time, then there should definitely be a discount because they overpromised for the scoring the previous year.
Councilmember Dorfman.
I mean, some projects will actually do pre-development grants and then phase them. Have we ever given any thought, or is there any way to actually look at some of these big projects as multi-year applications?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Dorfman,
You know,
we strongly advise applicants that have big projects to do exactly that.
right, we're asked, that's what I
We're
thought.
looking at, and we do also strongly encourage them to use our pre-development grants to help them define
Right.
those phases so that they're in manageable chunks. We've got a couple that we are on the horizon coming forward that
Okay.
are going to be many, many phases. So,
Let's
Mr.
see.
Chair, I'm sensing that we'll continue to move forward on this, but this one's maybe a maybe.
I think that captures what my sense is. I think there's interest in exploring it further.
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
On all of these, I think it's important to talk to people throughout the region about stuff. We tend to oversample the people who like the grants and get the grants. And like last year when we had the work group or whatever it was, the majority of the room was from cities that get a lot of grants, and there was just a couple representatives from places that don't get grants. And if we always ask the same people, we're going to get the same answer, but it's not necessarily for the good of the whole region or for the good of the program. It's, let me protect my little turf on getting grants. And one of the, I think I'm the only person here who's on both environment and community development, but they've done a lot of continuous improvement stuff where they look at things more cross jurisdictionally and look at it from the outside rather than just the insiders fighting over the scraps. And I mean, I think there's a lot that we could learn from their models of customer service and reaching out to the entire region rather than kind of just, because it feels like we're giving this a little more time than last time, but it feels like we're having the same old discussions of turf battles and whatnot that we get in the livable communities stuff. And I would like to see us move to a more continuous improvement sort of a model at looking at things so that we get better buy-in throughout the region, because livable communities is one of the things that people tend to look at us and go, well, what does that really offer most of the region?
Mr. Chair, and I also like to add that that's one of the things that was encouraging about this workshop we had with Metro Cities. There were communities there that we haven't heard from before, so it was great to have them there and become more familiar with us.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on.
Paul, is that a network that we can continue to kind of re-engage as we're moving toward the fund distribution plan? I think that would be ideal to continue to use that list of folks who've already expressed some interest.
Right, Mr. Chair, we're asking Metro Cities for their sign-up list.
Great.
Actually, they gave us a sign-up list, but we need names and we need addresses and email addresses.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, like in the TBRA, we'd like to look at helping out those smaller jobs projects or jobs only projects in LCDA and LCDA TOD. Currently, and I think this has worked very well, it's heavily weighted into favoring affordable housing, and that's a good thing. But again, there are other times when we've heard from applicants that they don't bother applying because they don't have affordable housing. And so we're optimistic that we can take a closer look at how the points are distributed in the review process to see if we can't make it less of a hurdle for jobs only projects to be able to compete. We just had one this year, the apprenticeship program in North Minneapolis, St. Louis Parks, Bridgewater Bank. Those two projects were able to score better because they were not just jobs, but the Bridgewater Bank had entrepreneurial space. They helped smaller businesses get motivated, and the apprenticeship project was training people for jobs in the renewable energy industry. So we're optimistic that we can try and help reduce the obstacle or hurdle that it is for jobs only projects. And I'm seeing heads nod.
Councilmember Mott?
Mr. Chair, Paul, I'm very supportive of that. With workforce becoming an increasingly important issue of concern, being able to fund things like the apprenticeship center become more and more important.
Mr. Chair, the one thing we have to be very careful in doing this is that we don't want to unintentionally reduce the focus on affordable housing. And we're very mindful of that.
Mm-hmm.
Along the same lines, we think we can. There's a couple of categories of funding that, particularly in area of conformity with comp plans. If you are in conformity with the comp plan, you automatically get so many points. And we're thinking that we might be able to better target those points to reward some projects that do a much better job of community engagement. Because currently the number of points available in that category is relatively low. And there's been a couple of projects that have done an exceptionally good job of doing that more active outreach and engagement. And we've got a couple of pre-development grants that were just awarded that have and are continuing to do better, more active engagement. And we'd like to be able to help them score better for doing that.
On this one, Paul, I was going around in my head a little bit about how we would evaluate community engagement. It feels very much to me like an input as opposed to an output. And how would we go about trying to assign some value to a process that is undertaken around a particular project? I mean, I guess we could develop sort of a rubric, like, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? But I would not want the program to get to a place where we said, well, how many people showed up to a meeting? How many, people sent email? Those are not metrics that I feel like would be appropriate or all that consistent across projects. So this strikes me as a challenge.
Mr. Kelly's got a response for that.
Excellent.
Well, a response. Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. One thing that we're looking at is, and we've had some examples of this in recent projects, which was helpful kind of thinking through this weighting. We have projects now that are developing partnerships with a local VFW, for example, because they're targeting homeless vets in their residential building, and now they're securing an avenue or channel to get those residents into the house. We have projects that are developing partnerships with a city's arts organization, local arts organizations, in how they're going to display those students or that organizations work within their public space, which is something we're funding. Great River Landing in Minneapolis was built, that's kind of one of our prime examples, is built to serve men coming out of prison system. The designers and that development team worked with those men on developing that project, the actual design of it, and how it may serve them. Those are some examples of things we're looking at as being much more innovative and using equitable development strategies than we had a neighborhood meeting, which is required by the city. Sometimes we get that, and that's great, but that's usually required. And so we look at that. We want to know, are you going above and beyond and how you're reaching out? We are looking to the equitable development scorecard as well. Is that being used? There are some points of that being used in these projects further earlier in the development process rather than, like I said, the development meeting. that's the tone, kind of the direction we've been looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's much more substantial in terms of how people are being involved, not necessarily the numbers.
Sure. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I hear you emphasizing something more on sort of the project partnership side of that equation, as opposed to maybe community engagement is just more amorphous and a little bit more challenging to compare. It strikes me more difficult.
Mr. Chair, and we're also, as I mentioned earlier, in our increased outreach efforts, we're trying to highlight those examples to prospective applicants of this is what somebody else did. This is what we mean by more active engagement.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also plays directly to this question about what is demonstrative about a project, and this might be part of that answer. Is this is a better, more authentic way of actually going through this process of building something in partnership with a city in the region and their partners. I'd like that a lot. Councilmember Munt.
Mr. Chair, I favor this because I think robust early engagement ensures a more successful project. And I also feel like we have a lot of tools now that are available, whether it's our toolkit, the scorecard, our public engagement plan. We've got tools that will help people who aren't in the habit of doing robust engagement compete for this kind of additional score.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Dorfman.
I can think of lots of projects where they did relatively, including the examples that you gave, where there's been what I would consider to be innovative partnerships and robust engagement. I'm having trouble with LCDA projects of thinking of projects that haven't done robust engagement. It's hard, and so do you have some examples of that?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't want to name names, but frankly, many of the development projects do the one-dimensional, one-way communication. They hold the public meeting in the neighborhood. Here's what we want to do. Will you endorse this? And they don't have that earlier in the process engagement where they actually ask the impacted parties, potentially impacted parties or underserved populations to help them with the design of the project or even the services that project might produce. So many projects do, public participation has been around for decades and decades. Right. And typically what it is, and I've done it, you go out and you hold a neighborhood meeting. Here's what we want to do. If we don't get rocks thrown at us, then we're going to go ahead and do it. What we're talking about is really getting people to help design the project. And frankly, again, we're really trying to promote the pre-development grants to use our funding to help do that.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But if we're talking about LCDA money, the LCDA, sorry, never mind. I was thinking something different. I was thinking TBRA, and I was thinking, how on earth do we have public engagement about TBRA? Never mind, it's been a long day.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm talking about using the pre-development money to help pay for this engagement, but in the regular development grants, they would get points for doing it.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Mott.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to say this until people are sick of me saying it. Equity requires that we meet people where they are. It requires that we engage low wealth communities and people of color and indigenous people so that they can plan for and benefit from our investments. If we are truly committed to equity, then we have to provide the resources for people to do that kind of robust engagement.
So I'm hearing strong support for that.
So we've got our work ahead of us. Somewhat similar in the TOD category of livable communities demonstration account. We're seeing a few projects coming in that are really do a better job of actually being designed to be oriented to transit. And so, but in the scoring process, particularly the step one process, we think there's not quite enough points to really give credit for those more robust developments oriented to transit. So we're looking at, once again, without tampering with the weighting of the other categories, trying to steal some points to boost that up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then
It's
finally,
direction.
I don't hear any serious disagreement with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, this is one that we started out with when we first created the TOD category. We had this great council's transit-oriented development guide, which is now even better. And we wanted to hold the applicants' feet to the fire of meeting these thresholds to be able to even apply for your project. Largely, this has created, it's not been real effective. The communities checked the box. We gave them 3 years to comply with this. Either you have it in place, you have 3 years to do it. Creates a burden for us to go back and track that, whether or not they're doing it. And frankly, rewarding those projects that do a better job, like I just talked about, is a much more effective way, in our opinion, to further the council strategies on transit-oriented development. So what we're really hoping to do is remove the threshold criteria, because it's really become just a check the box for communities. And frankly, it's been a deterrent for some communities.
Hmm.
Again, we still retain, through the scoring process, promoting better transit-oriented development.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect
Councilmember
Mr. Kelly
Elkins
has something to add.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I wanted to emphasize that these elements are addressed in the scoring. Um, Two additional points. One, because there's a small area plan in place that might meet all of the criteria, we have examples where that hasn't actually produced a project that might meet those examples. And in fact, we've had, I think there are 3 projects in the past couple of years that were contradictory to the small area plan, and the designers themselves called the city out on that, but that's the city's prerogative. So I think in the use of a threshold criteria, it doesn't guarantee a project that complies with the points we're hoping for, whereas scoring the project on some of those elements, we at least can say, well, the project's not meeting the criteria we want it to, therefore it might not get funding. The other point is that there are many instances where there are transit areas that don't have small area plans done. This is really in LRTs and maybe the BRT lines, but A line, for example, the D line, the C line, those communities or those station areas typically are not going to have a station area plan done.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might not when that grant comes in or within a few years. So having that threshold criteria really biases TOD grants toward only the significant LRT or BRT transit corridors.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to that point too, I just was recently looking at some of the Southwest stationary planning work, which is great stuff, but we're now a lot closer to moving forward with that project than in 2011 when a lot of that work was undertaken, station by station. And so there's a lot more detail that's emerging about what is this marketplace going to look like right at that station area. So I agree, for all the reasons you've described. This is maybe something we consider retiring for now. Councilmember Elkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we ever had a case where we had a proposal and then it didn't happen because the official controls needed to execute it weren't adopted?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Elkins, I don't think so. But to amplify Mr. Kelly's comment, we had one community, which will remain nameless, that we awarded a pre-development grant to do in the first round of TOD grants, where we're offering pre-development grants without a project. We funded pre-development funding to do stationary plans for the stops in that community. And then they came in a few years later with a project, and I asked if it was consistent with the station area plans that we'd helped fund, and the answer was, "Oh yeah, we should probably check into that."
Great.
And it wasn't.
Councilmember Kramer.
Are we doing, in the process of the scoring, is there any analysis of whether the project has a positive or a negative influence on existing RCAPs?
Mr. Chair, committee members, we do look at the change in affordability levels that the addition of a housing development may have on the affordability levels within the census tracts, the geographic area or the station area. So at some level, we're looking at that.
It seems to me, in no specific criticism, that we've seen a lot of proposals or a few proposals for apartment buildings that are lower income in RCAPs, and I'm not sure how that makes sense sometimes.
Mr. Chair, I think that's addressed in two different ways. Our housing reviewers in the step one review process take into account the impact on the neighborhood. And then, as Mr. Kelly mentioned, before we bring this to you, we have one of our research staff do an analysis of what the new project would do in terms of the distribution of the units within the various strata of affordability ranges. Sometimes it's just background information, and sometimes it's more illuminating. So I'm not hearing any strong resistance to us removing that.
No,
There's
quite quiet non-resistance.
Mr. Chair, that brings us to the next steps. We're meeting. We're gonna start meeting with the Equity Advisory Committee to get their input. We'll come back to you in January with maybe some more details on this, and then we're hoping to have the fund distribution plan adopted in February this year, rather than March as in past years, because it would be an awful lot to expect the new council to adopt the fund distribution plan at their very first meeting. So you have all become such experts in livable communities that your input is very important too. In all seriousness, very important. And I'm sorry it took up so much time, but this is very important to us.
Thank you, Paul. One question I had is, when is our first deadline for applications of any of the programs?
May 1st,
May
Mr.
1st.
Chair, is when the spring round of tax-based revitalization account grants occur, and the pre-development grants for the TOD, the LCDA regular program, and the TOD. And remember, last year was the first year we added pre-development to the regular LCDA, and that's turned out to be really a good move.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you have sufficient direction from our discussion for the next steps?
Mr. Chair, I think so, and you still have a chance to change your minds.
Mm-hmm.
But we would be hopeful to adopt it in February because, again, as you pointed out, all our schedules are driven by the fund distribution plan.
Right. Great. Thank you.
And again, thank you for all the time.
It's critical work. So thank you for the discussion. That concludes our agenda this evening. We can be adjourned. Happy holidays.